Hello, YouTube Pipers. I'm here with my Savinelli Bing's favorite, full of Carter Hall. It's a Sunday. And the weather's going to begin to change, and it's going to get very cold, from what I understand. I've been looking at the weather to make sure on Tuesday it's not going to be raining, because the temperature is supposed to drop below freezing, from what I understand. And if it's raining, those roads are going to be very slick, and I have an appointment to go to. So I'm going to have to leave that in the Lord's hands, I reckon. Well, I've been thinking about my senior English teacher at our high school, James Island High School. Mascot was a ram. And the football team was known as the Rams. So our senior year is the year that I want to talk about. I'd never had to study hard in school. It always came easy. But this year was a little different. That first day, we met our new English teacher. And I went home and I was sulking because she had told us it was going to be rough for us if we weren't used to studying. Well, I was doing my homework when my mother came home from work. And she said, "How'd your first day at school go?" I said, "It was okay, I guess." She said, "Doesn't sound like you really think that." And I said, "Well, we got this new English teacher. I don't like her at all." She just looked at me and smiled. She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, she's been laying out what she plans to do with us, and it sounds like we're going to have to work really hard in her class." And she said, "Well, isn't that good?" I said, "No, it's not good. This is our senior year. We're supposed to be having fun, not worrying about schoolwork." And she smiled at me and she said, "Well, Ricky, you remember, just about every year, there's always one teacher that you can't stand in the beginning. But then at the end, you just love her to death." I said, "Yeah, that might be so, but not this time. Just can't stand this teacher." She looked at me and she said, "We'll see." And she went about what she was doing. I went back to my homework. Next day, I walked into class sullen because I had to sit here and listen to her yammer on. The new teacher, that is. I sat in the back and slapped my books on the desktop, slouched into my seat, and looked up front, just frowning. And this teacher looked up and she said, all right, everybody take a seat. Now on the board, she had already written term paper, topics. And I looked at that and I said, oh my gosh, already? So everybody came in, sat down, and she got up out of her chair and she stood in front of her desk. And she said, I'm going to expect a lot of you, a lot out of each of you, because this class is primarily to prepare you for college. College is going to have a lot of writing, and you need to know how to research and write well. And I'm gonna have you doing that before the year is over. Somebody in the back of the room shouted, well, what if we aren't going to college? She said, well, if you're not going to college and you don't want to learn how to write, I'm sure that you can transfer out of this English class into one of the other English classes. She said, anybody here want to do that? Several people got up, gathered their books. And walked out. And she told the last one as he went out to close the door. And so I kept brooding over this term paper topics up there. And I said, why are you, I just shouted out, I didn't raise my hand or anything. I said, why are you giving us topics for a term paper? We don't have that until like the end of the year. And she said, and your name, sir? I said, Rick Croucher. She said, well, Mr. Croucher, that's because I want each of you to research it well and to have a good paper by the end. I don't want you to wait till the last two days and write a term paper, which would turn out to be very terrible. And she said, Croucher, is it? And I said, yes. She said, well, Mr. Croucher, didn't you want to go with the other fellows, other people, other students that wanted to go to another English class? It sounds like you don't want to stay in here. And I said, well, I don't have a choice. I'm going to college. She said, okay, well, if you're going to stay in this class, you're going to learn how to write. So I slunk back into my seat and didn't say anything for the rest of the time. Finally, class was over, and I got up and walked out and was going to the car because I took the car in the morning. I had to pick my mother up at work. And a friend walked out with me. He said, what do you think of that new teacher? I said, I don't like her at all. He said, sounds like she's really wanting to help us if we're going to college. And I said, I don't care. This is our senior year back on that subject. We're supposed to be having fun, not working hard. He said, I think she's going to help us. And I think it'll be good once we get to college. I said, well, in college, you're supposed to do that, but not here in senior year. And he said, well, I think she's going to be a help to us, and she ain't bad looking neither. So I took him home and went and picked my mother up. My mother got in the car. She said, well, I said, ma'am. She said, well, how was your second day in English class? I said, right off the bat, Mom, she wants us to start getting our information to write a term paper, which isn't due for another, 4 months? And she said, is that bad? And I said, I don't want to work. This is my, again, this is my senior year. I want to just have fun. She just kind of chuckled and she said, well, sounds like you're going to have your work cut out for you then. I said, yeah. We drove home. Next morning, I went into class, slumped down in my seat. Up front, I saw a record player. Never seen that in a class before. Anyway, she had everybody settle down, closed the door to the school, or to the classroom, stood in front of her desk, and I kind of looked at her, since my friend said she ain't bad to look at, because I don't know that I really looked at her quite so much because I was just so turned off by her attitude. And she had dark hair. She was about, I would say, 5'7", 5'8". Had on a plaid skirt, a white blouse, and a light green sweater that draped over the blouse. And then I scanned down to her legs, and her legs had on these socks that went all the way up past her knees, and they were like plaid, gorgeous colors. And I just thought to myself, nobody else dresses like that. But anyway, I looked up and I said, without raising my hand again, what's the record player for? And she looked up and she said, Mr. Croucher? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I'm going to play a record that's going to show you what early English sounded like. It's part of the, what the heck was it? I can't think of the author now, but he's probably the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales it was the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. I said, you mean you're going to play somebody speaking what we tried to read in our homework last night, which was the poem from the Canterbury Tales that we were told to read, which was written in this old English. It didn't make any sense to me at all. And I just kind of scanned it because it seemed like gibberish. So she said, yes, Mr. Croucher, would you kindly just let me put the record on and listen? I said, yes, ma'am. So she put the record on. And I kind of closed my eyes and just listened to what was being said on the record. And it sounded like poetry, even though it didn't make any sense, because the words just weren't words that I knew, but the mellifluous words, the sound of the words was pleasant and poetic. And she lifted the needle, put it to the side, and she said, what do you think of that? And I said, sounds like poetry, but it sure don't make no sense. She said, Mr. Croucher, let somebody else talk. I said, yes, ma'am. And she kind of rolled her eyes, and somebody else said something, and she said, well, all right, let's listen one more time. And we did. And she lifted the needle and she said, what I want to do now is I want everybody to repeat along with the record. And everybody was repeating the words as they sounded on the record. Some people were mispronouncing and started giggling. And so that got the class kind of chuckling, and everybody was kind of laughing. And then the teacher herself, she was laughing. And it kind of made things a little more pleasant. And she looked back my way and saw that I was smiling. She smiled at me. Well, the rest of the class went on and she talked about various things, and I kind of listened because it seemed a little more interesting after hearing that. And then we got a translation that told us how it read in modern day English. And I just, to myself, it was louder than it should have been. Well, that's what it means. And she looked over at me and she said, "Yes, Mr. Croucher, that's what it means." Well, I went home that day. Did all my homework, and there wasn't really anything on TV, so I went to my room and picked up that list. And decided on my topic for my term paper, since we had to let her know. And next day, I walked to my desk and saw the record player was still there. Sat down. I said, "The record player's still there." And she didn't look up. And she said, "Yes, Mr. Croucher, it's still there." I said, "We're going to hear more gibberish from olden days?" And she looked up and she said, "No, I have some ballads I'm going to play for you. Ballads that were played by the troubadours back in the time of these when this I can't remember the guy who wrote the thing. Here I am talking back in the time of, well, anyway, she said, "So I'm just going to let you guys listen again today." My memory just isn't as good as it used to be at all. It's getting worse and worse. So anyway, she put on some records and the ballads played, and there was one that stuck in my mind, and it was Barbary Allen. And that one just went through my mind for the rest of the day in class. Excuse me. When I went to pick my mother up, she said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Well," and told her about the record player and the ballads. I said, "And there was one that I think you would like." It's called Barbary Allen. Now, we didn't have the internet and all that stuff back in those days, so there was no way to find anything to play for my mother. So she didn't get to hear it then till way later. And class went on like this, and I began to warm to her a little bit, though she was still cool towards me. But she asked me that week if I had decided on my term paper subject. I said, "I've decided I'm going to write on Thomas Hardy." Thomas Hardy. And she said, "Well, that would fit your morose nature, writing on him, but I'm going to tell you right now, his writings are very depressing. I don't know if that's the best thing for you to be reading." I said, "Well, I've chosen it, and that's what I'm going to write on." She said, "Okay, Mr. Croucher." Brought in the, what was it, 3x5 cards, because we had to fill out 3x5 cards as our notes, and took them up, and she went through them and she said, "Sounds okay. I think you might do all right." So anyway, things went on, and the chinks in my armor were slowly opening up so that I didn't hate the teacher anymore. as a person, she was pretty interesting, and she wasn't bad to look at either. Well, the time came for Christmas vacation, and we had turned in our term papers a few days before, and it was the last day until we took off for 2 weeks for Christmas. And the students were walking out the door to go home. And as everybody walked out, she said, "Mr. Croucher." I turned around and said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "How about stay behind and let me speak to you for a minute?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." So everybody left, and I walked over to the desk, and she said, "I just wanted you to know that I looked over your term paper. It's surprisingly good." I said, "Surprisingly? You were expecting less?" And she said, "Well, I'll be honest with you, Mr. Croucher. To me, you seem like one of my flickering candles. You didn't seem to have the intelligence I thought you needed for this class." And I looked at her funny. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You were sullen and you had a chip on your—" I said, "Well, I may have had a bit of a chip." She said, "A bit of a chip? You had a boulder on your shoulder. But you seem to have mellowed some over the year." And I was just wanting you to know that I was very pleased when I saw that your paper seemed so encouraging. And I said, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry for being the way I was in the beginning." But I couldn't help it. I'm just kind of a, I guess, rebellious teenager. She said, "Well, I'm glad you're in my class, Ricky. And I'm glad that you turned into one of my bright lights and not one of my flickering candles." Because she had divided her class into two categories: flickering candles and bright lights. And I had moved up in her estimation. Well, that was 1963. And in 64, we had her other half of her teaching the next semester. Surprisingly, I did very well in her class, and she was very happy with me that she had stuck with me, as she said. One essay, one essay we had to write. She was very disapproving of the language I used in it. And she asked me to rewrite it. And I rewrote it and took it into her, and she read it over, and she said, "I want you to rewrite it again." Because I still don't look like some of the language you're using in here, especially when you call this girl a pig. I said, "Well, I don't know what else to say about her. It was a blind date, and she turned out to be a pig." Which today, if anybody said anything like that about a girl, they would be ostracized. They would not be in company at all. But I finally wrote it the third time. Found another word to use instead of pig, which she still shook her head when she read it. She didn't give me a very good grade on it, but at least I passed it. She tried to teach me more than just schoolwork, and I think she succeeded. When we had our 50th reunion, we had her come to our 50th. And this story I just told you, I had written down in much more detail. And I gave her a copy of it because I thought she would be interested in what I thought about her senior year. When she taught us, that was the only year she taught. She left after that. That school lost a mighty good teacher. And she let me know how much she appreciated the story, but she said, I want you to take this story and I want you to rewrite it, and I want you to make me feel the place we're in, the class we're in, the school we're in. Still trying to make me a better writer. After our 50th reunion, she passed away a couple of years after that, and sorely missed by everyone who had her as their teacher. Such an exceptional lady. My mother was right. At the end of the year, I was crazy about her. And I was sorry for James Island for her not staying at James Island. How about you guys? Any of you have one special teacher that stood out in your life that made you better than you were? She was a great teacher. Excuse me. And I'll always look back on that year as one of real discovery about myself, about her, about life. Okay, folks, I have talked long enough. I'm sure that plenty of you have dropped out. Thank you for those who stayed with sharing a pipe and some PG Tips tea. Thank you, people. I appreciate you all. I have gained some more subscribers, and I thank you all. All of you who have subscribed and all of you who leave comments, I appreciate them very much, and I try to answer them all. I wish you all a good evening, and God bless you till the next time. Bye-bye.